The shackles dug into Sarah. Mitchell's wrists like relentless teeth as the transport van rattled past the weathered sign for Ironwood Maximum Security Penitentiary in the heart of Texas. A fortress of concrete and razor wire that housed the most vicious male criminals the state had to offer. And she knew with chilling certainty that this was no mere bureaucratic error, but a deliberate trap designed to end her life. The vast expanse of scrubland blurred by outside the reinforced window. Dry and unforgiving under the relentless sun of 2025. As she calculated the deviation from the planned route to Springvale Women's Correctional Facility, her mind racing. Through memorized maps from her sleepless nights in county jail, piecing together the betrayal that had landed her here. "Driver," she called through the partition with measured calm, her voice betraying none of the storm brewing inside. "We've gone off course. Springvale is south, not west." The guard in the passenger seat twisted around, his face a slab of indifference, etched with years of routine cruelty, and muttered, "You'll end up where you're supposed to, inmate. Now sit tight and keep quiet." Sarah pressed her lips into a thin line, suppressing the instinctive urge to command obedience that came from her years as a Delta Force commander, where hesitation meant death and authority was absolute. Here, in this orange jumpsuit that itched against her skin like a constant reminder of her fall from grace, she was reduced to a number, a target, stripped of the identity that had seen her through covert operations in hostile territories across the globe. The arrest replayed in her mind like a bad dream she couldn't shake. Starting innocently enough in the fluorescent-lit aisles of a suburban grocery store where she'd reached for a carton of eggs, only to find herself slammed face-first onto the cold linoleum, a knee grinding into her back as handcuffs clicked shut. "Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for armed robbery and conspiracy," the detective had intoned flatly, as if reciting weather reports, while shocked shoppers whipped out phones to capture the spectacle, their whispers and flashes turning her humiliation into viral fodder. "This is a mistake," she'd gasped, tasting the metallic tang of blood from her split lip. But the words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the siren wail as she was hauled away. Her lawyer, Michael Reed, a grizzled veteran with a quarter-century of courtroom battles under his belt, had seemed like her lifeline when she'd scraped together the fee from her modest savings. He'd pored over timelines, hunted down alibis, and challenged every scrap of evidence with the tenacity of a bulldog. "This case is a house of cards," he'd confided during one of their strategy sessions in the dim jailhouse meeting room, rubbing his temples as fatigue lines deepened around his eyes. No physical links, shaky witness IDs, and a timeline that crumbles under scrutiny. It feels like we're pushing against a tidal wave. Sarah had nodded, sensing the undercurrent of something darker, especially when key witnesses recanted under mysterious pressure and security footage from her actual location. Quiet coffee shop where she'd nursed a latte that morning vanished from servers without a trace. The trial unfolded like a scripted farce, with District Attorney William Baxter, a slick politician, eyeing re-election, painting her as a mastermind criminal to score points with the media. His closing arguments laced with dramatic flair that ignored facts in favor of spectacle. Judge Laura Bennett, usually fair, but appearing unusually strained throughout, overruled every objection Reed raised, her rulings coming swift and unyielding, culminating in a verdict that hit like a gut punch. Guilty on all counts, 7 years minimum security. But minimum security implied rehabilitation. Not this descent into a male-dominated hellscape where survival was a daily gamble. As the van pulled through Ironwood's massive gates, flanked by guard towers where snipers tracked every movement, with cold precision, Sarah's tactical mind shifted into overdrive, assessing the perimeter walls topped with electrified fencing, the multiple layers of security checkpoints, and the oppressive architecture that screamed entrapment. The vehicle halted in a barren courtyard ringed by squat brick buildings from the mid-20th century, their faded paint peeling like old scars. And the air hit her like a wall thick with the scent of sweat, bleach, and underlying despair. Inmates, in identical orange jumpsuits, milled about in the yard beyond a chain-link fence, their gazes locking onto the new arrival with predatory curiosity, sizing her up as fresh meat in an ecosystem where weakness was fatal. Sergeant Harris, burly corrections officer with a perpetual scowl, and sergeant stripes that spoke of hardened authority, yanked open the door. "Mitchell, move it." Processing doesn't wait. She stepped out awkwardly, the chains hobbling her steps, and repeated firmly, "There's been an error. I'm assigned to Springvale Women's." Harris glanced at his clipboard dismissively. "Records say male housing. Take it up with the warden if you want, but for now, you're here." As they marched toward the intake building, Sarah caught snippets of murmured conversations from barred windows overhead, inmates catcalling and speculating in crude terms about the new girl, their laughter echoing like warnings. Her instincts, sharpened by 15 years of classified missions where she'd infiltrated enemy strongholds and extracted high-value targets under fire, screamed setup. Someone with deep pockets and deeper grudges had orchestrated this, rerouting her transport, altering records, ensuring she'd vanish in a place where accidents were commonplace and investigations superficial. The intake procedure was a dehumanizing gauntlet, an invasive strip search that left her feeling exposed in ways combat never had. A delousing shower under freezing water that stung her skin, and a cursory medical exam by a nurse who barely glanced up from her forms. "Any conditions, meds, history of violence?" The nurse droned. Sarah paused, her mind flashing to dozens of confirmed kills in shadowed alleys and desert outposts. But she replied evenly, "None." Officer Rodriguez, a wiry intake clerk with a puzzled frown, muttered as he typed, "This doesn't add up, classifications male. But obviously, ... double quotes," he trailed off, shrugging. "Not my call. You're headed to Block D, Gen Pop." Sarah's pulse spiked. General population meant immersion among killers, rapists, and gang enforcers. No protective custody to shield her from the inevitable. Until this is sorted. She pressed, but Rodriguez was already waving her through. Across the state in Dallas, John Carver lounged in his high-rise office overlooking the glittering skyline, swirling a glass of aged bourbon as his phone buzzed with confirmation. Package secured. The defense mogul had built his empire unlucrative Pentagon contracts. But Sarah Mitchell's whistleblowing on his company's fraudulent overbilling during Iraq deployments had cost him $40 million and his reputation. Now, retired and vulnerable, she was paying the price through a web of bribes and favors that ensured her conviction and misplacement. "It's poetic," he chuckled to himself, dialing Baxter. "She's in Gen Pop." Baxter confirmed, his voice tight. With ambition, words out, she's a Fed informant. Won't last a week. Carver hung up, toasting his reflection. Justice in his world was a commodity, and he'd just bought premium. Back at Ironwood, Sarah navigated the labyrinthine corridors to her cell. The walls a sickly green that absorbed light and hope. Doors slamming with finality as inmates peered through slits. Her cellmate, a towering brute named Briggs with tattoos, proclaiming gang allegiance and white supremacist icons, eyed her from the top bunk like a wolf spotting dinner. "Fresh meat," he growled, flexing. Sarah claimed the bottom bunk without flinching. Noted. Asterisk that night, sleep evaded her as prison sounds assaulted her senses. Distant shouts, clanging metal, the rhythmic sweep of searchlights outside. By morning, during breakfast in the cavernous cafeteria, silence fell as she entered, hundreds of eyes tracking her like laser sights. She took her tray of congealed eggs and stale bread to an isolated table, but within moments, 3 inmates from the area. Wolf's gang slid in opposite her. "You're the new fish." The leader, a lean man with neck ink depicting skulls, stated flatly. "Heard you're a snitch." Sarah met his stare. "Wrong intel." He leaned in, breath foul. "Snitches don't last here." The confrontation escalated subtly, their postures shifting to threat, but Sarah's training kicked in. She noted escape vectors, potential improvised weapons like the metal tray. When they rose to intimidate, she remained seated, projecting calm that unnerved them. "Enjoy your meal," she said, and they backed off, muttering, but she knew it was temporary. Later, in the yard during rec time, the real test came, the same. 3 cornered her near a blind spot by the fence, away from tower views. "Time to learn the rules," the leader snarled, pulling a shank from his sleeve. Sarah's world narrowed to combat mode. No fear, just calculation. As the first lunged, she sidestepped, grabbing his arm and using his momentum to slam him into the second, their heads cracking together. The third swung wildly. She ducked, swept his legs, and finished with a precise strike to his throat that left him gasping. Guards swarmed in with whistles blaring, batons ready. "On the ground!" they bellowed. Sarah complied slowly, hands visible, but as they cuffed her for isolation review, whispers rippled through the watching crowd. This woman wasn't prey. She was something lethal, a ghost in orange who fought like a shadow warrior, in solitary for the day. A dim cell with nothing but a cot and her thoughts. Sarah pieced more of the puzzle. The altered records, the rapid conviction, pointed to Carver, the man whose empire she toppled with evidence of rigged bids and phantom supplies that endangered troops. Emerging back to Genpop, she felt the shift respect mixed with wariness, inmates giving her space but plotting in shadows. Torres, the guard who'd processed her, pulled her aside during laundry duty. That was no fluke in the yard. Military? Sarah hesitated, then nodded fractionally. "Keep your head down," he advised, "but if you need an ear, I'm listening." "Something's off with your file." It was her first potential ally, a crack in the armor of isolation. As days blurred, subtle threats mounted, poisoned glances in the chow line. Anonymous notes slipped under her cell door, warning of bounties. Briggs, her cellmate, grew bolder, his nighttime pacing laced with menace, but Sarah slept lightly, ready. One evening, he made his move, looming over her bunk with intent in his eyes. "Time to break you in," he hissed. She exploded upward, knee to groin, elbow to jaw. He crumpled, bloodied but alive. Guards hauled him to the hole, and Torres filed the report as self-defense. "You're ruffling feathers," he confided later. Wardens ignoring transfer requests. Sarah's resolve hardened. This wasn't just survival, it was war against an invisible enemy pulling strings from afar. In D.C., Colonel Robert Hayes dug deeper, uncovering digital trails of tampered files linking to Carver's network, rallying old contacts for a federal probe. Back in Ironwood, Sarah trained in secret, push-ups in her cell, mental drills replaying. Past ops, preparing for the escalation she knew was coming. The prison buzzed with rumors of her prowess, turning her from target to legend. But legends attract bigger hunters, and Carver's noose tightened unseen in the shadowed underbelly of Ironwood Maximum Security, where the clang of metal doors echoed like distant thunder and the air hung heavy with the perpetual tang of institutional decay. Sarah Mitchell's survival instincts sharpened to a razor's edge as she navigated the treacherous rhythms of prison life. Her every move, a calculated step, in a deadly dance orchestrated by unseen forces. Days blurred into a monotonous grind of chow lines, work details, and yard time. But beneath the surface, the prison pulsed with growing tension, whispers circulating like venom through veins about the mysterious woman who had dismantled 3 Aryan wolves in the yard without breaking a sweat. turning her from an anomaly into a marked target whose elimination promised riches beyond the wildest dreams of these caged men. Sarah felt the shift palpably during her shifts in the laundry room, a cavernous space filled with the rhythmic thump of industrial washers and the acrid scent of bleach, where inmates folded endless stacks of orange jumpsuits under the watchful eyes of guards. Here, conversations dipped to hushed tones when she approached, eyes darting away as if her presence alone invited calamity. Martinez, an older lifer with weathered skin and a quiet wisdom earned from decades behind bars, pulled her aside one humid afternoon amid the steam rising from the dryers, his voice low and urgent. "You're stirring up a hornet's nest, lady. Word spreading faster than lice in Hear That Yard fight. It's got the gangs talking alliance. Something I ain't seen since the big riot back in '98. Sarah nodded, her hands mechanically pressing a seam as she scanned the room for threats. Noting how two inmates from the Los Diablos gang lingered near the supply closet, their postures too casual to be innocent. "Any specifics?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. Martinez glanced around before leaning in. "Bounties out on you. Big money. Six-figure split among whoever gets the job done. They say you're a Fed plant, here to rat out the big players. Aryan wolves are leading, but even the independents are sniffing around." The revelation hit Sarah like a suppressed round confirmation of what she'd suspected since the transport detour. This wasn't random violence but a funded hit, and the only person with motive and means was John Carver, the defense tycoon whose fraudulent schemes she'd exposed during her last deployment in Iraq, where she'd documented padded contracts for substandard gear that had gotten good soldiers killed. Back then, as a Delta Force commander embedded in supply chains, she'd risked everything to smuggle evidence out, leading to congressional hearings that blacklisted ironclad defense and cost Carver his fortune and family legacy. Now, in retirement, she'd become his loose end, and he'd woven a net of corruption to tie it off permanently. In his opulent Dallas penthouse, overlooking the sprawling city lights that twinkled like distant stars mocking his fall from grace, Carver paced with a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a silky venom as he conferred with District Attorney William Baxter. The bounties in play, Carver demanded, pouring another measure of scotch to steady his nerves. Baxter, from his campaign office cluttered with posters proclaiming justice for all, replied tersely. Activated through channels words, "out cheese." A snitch. Guards are briefed to look the other way on minor incidents. But Carver, this is escalating. If she survives too long, questions might arise. Carver smirked, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showing a man aged prematurely. "Buy bitterness." "She won't. I've got contingencies. Double the payout if it's done clean, like an accident in the works." Hanging up, he dialed Warden Ellis Kemper, a man indebted to him through backroom deals that had funded the warden's gambling habits. "Status," Carver barked. Kemper, sweating in his dimly lit office at Ironwood, where security monitors flickered with grainy feeds of the blocks, stammered slightly. "She's in Gen Pop, as requested. Fights are brewing, but she's resilient. Took down 3 wolves without." A scratch Carver's grip tightened on the glass. "Resilient. She's a ghost from my past make her disappear. Leak more intel. Say she's got dirt on the gangs from her Fed days. That'll unite them." As the call ended, Carver stared at a framed photo of his daughter, now estranged after the scandals, fueling his resolve. Sarah Mitchell had stolen his future, and he'd repay in kind. Meanwhile, in the prison's bowels, Sarah adapted with the precision of her training, turning the laundry room into her observation post. Cataloging alliances by the way inmates clustered wolves in the north corner. Diablos claiming the machines, independents drifting like opportunistic scavengers. David Torres, the guard who'd first noted the anomaly in her file, became an unexpected variable in her equation. During a routine cell check, he lingered, his uniform crisp but his eyes carrying a flicker of doubt. Mitchell. That yard incident military bearing, if I've ever seen it. Army, Marines. Sarah weighed the risk, then admitted softly. Special Forces. Delta. Torres whistled low. Explains a lot. Look, your classification's been manually tweaked from central office. Someone high up wants you here. I'm digging quietly, but watch your back. Bounties real. His words were a lifeline in the isolation. The first crack of light in her concrete tomb, and Sarah filed them away. Knowing alliances in prison were fragile, but potentially game-changing. That night, in her solitary cell, since Briggs's removal. To the whole, she lay awake, mapping contingencies. Her mind replaying Delta Ops where she'd turned disadvantages into ambushes. Like the time in Baghdad when she'd used market chaos to extract a defector under heavy fire. But prison offered no exfil, only endurance. The escalation came subtly, at first a tampered meal tray in chow that reeked of something chemical, forcing her to skip it and endure hunger pangs that sharpened her focus. Then, during a rare library hour where dusty shelves held dog-eared books that inmates used more for shivs than reading, two independents approached under the guise of borrowing a volume, one slipping a note. Snitch dies slow. Sarah crumpled it. Her response, a steady gaze that made them retreat, but it signaled the net closing. Torres intercepted her afterward in the corridor, his voice a whisper amid the shuffle of feet. Got a ledger file change traces too. A DOJ login tied to Baxter's office. He's running for re-election, needs wins. But why you? Sarah confided partially. Exposed corruption in defense contracting. Carver's the puppet master. Torres's eyes widened. Ironclad defense. That's big. Leagues. I'll smuggle a message out if I can. Got a cousin in the feds. It was a gamble, but Sarah nodded, sensing his sincerity born from years of witnessing systemic rot. Far away in Washington, D.C., Colonel Robert Hayes, her former CO, pieced together fragments in his modest apartment, the secure line buzzing. With updates from Staff Sergeant Linda Carter, a loyal operator from their Delta days. Sir Mitchell's vanished post-conviction neighbors say empty apartment, no check-ins. Dug deeper. Arrested for robbery, routed to Ironwood Mail, Max Sec. Hayes's coffee cup paused mid-sip, his mind flashing to Sarah's impeccable Record 42. Confirmed hostiles neutralized, PSYOPs expert, the whistleblower who'd saved lives by exposing Carver's rot. Impossible. She's cleaner than most generals. Get me her jackets, sealed or not. Carter's voice crackled. Already on it, but files are heavily redacted. Smells like a cover-up. Hayes activated old networks, calling favors from Pentagon insiders, uncovering email trails hinting at bribes funneled through shell companies to Baxter and Kemper. We need marshals, he decided, but quietly Carver's got ears everywhere. Back at Ironwood, the pressure mounted during a work detail in the kitchen, where steam from boiling pots obscured views and knives were too accessible. Sarah volunteered for potato peeling, her station affording a view of entrances. But a Diablo's member accidentally bumped her, spilling hot oil that she dodged by instinct, scalding the floor instead. Oops, he sneered, but his eyes held intent. She reported it to Torres, who logged it as suspicious. They're testing boundaries, he said later. Next will be bolder. He proved right in the gym, a sweat-soaked arena of clanking weights and grunted exertion, where Sarah used free time to maintain her edge with bodyweight circuits. For wolves encircled her mid-pop, their leader flashing a tattooed grin. Gym accidents happen, weights slip. Sarah dropped lightly, assessing no shanks visible but improvised clubs from dumbbells possible. Try it, she challenged. And when the first swung a barbell like a bat, She parried with a forearm block that numbed her arm but allowed a counterkick to his knee, crumpling him. The others piled on, but her delta hand-to-hand shone. A throat jab here, joint lock there, leaving 2 wheezing and 1 fleeing as guards intervened. Solitary again, but this time Torres visited. "You're building a rep ghost woman. Gangs are wary, but bounties doubled. I sent word to my cousin. Feds might bite." Sarah thanked him. The human connection staved off the creeping despair. Dallas Carver fumed at reports of failed attempts, escalating by wiring more funds and leaking fabricated evidence of Sarah's betrayals to gang leaders via corrupt guards. At the Pentagon, Hayes's probe gained traction. A whistleblower email confirming Carver's DOJ ties, prompting a classified briefing where he argued for extraction. "She's one of ours," framed to silence her. Approval trickled slowly. Bureaucracy's curse, but momentum built. Inside Ironwood, Sarah's routine became a fortress. Eat alone, sleep in shifts, turn chores into recon. A breakthrough came via Torres. Smuggled note. Feds alerted. Hold on. But hold on grew harder as paranoia set in. Every shadow a potential blade. The climax of this phase erupted, not in violence, but revelation. During a lockdown drill, Torres slipped her a printout of her altered file, timestamps linking to Carver's IP proxies. "Proof," he whispered. Sarah memorized it. Her resolve igniting survival now meant exposure. As Carver plotted his final push from his fortress of glass and steel. Unaware of the federal noose tightening, Sarah prepared for the storm. Her alliance with Torres, a beacon in the gathering dark, turning hunted into hunter in this unforgiving arena. The dawn light filtered through the barred windows of Ironwood Maximum Security, like a reluctant intruder, casting long shadows across the concrete floors that Sarah Mitchell had come to know as her battlefield, but this morning carried an electric charge, a palpable foreboding that hummed in the air like the prelude to a desert storm she remembered from her Iraq tours, where silence often heralded the deadliest ambushes. She rose before the buzzer sounded, her muscles aching from the cumulative toll of improvised workouts and defensive skirmishes. Yet her mind was a fortress of focus, replaying the smuggled intel from Torres the night before. The bounty had ballooned. Alliances solidified, and the yard time today was designated as the kill zone, with guards conveniently understaffed due to a fabricated training exercise ordered from on high. Sarah fashioned her meager arsenal with the ingenuity born of Delta ingenuity, shard of plastic from a broken tray honed against the cell wall into a makeshift blade. A sock weighted with pilfered soap bars for blunt force, and a vial of pilfered cleaning fluid that could serve as an irritant spray in a pinch. Tools that paled against the improvised armory her hunters would wield, but enough to tip the scales in split-second decisions. As the cell door slid open with its mechanical groan, Torres appeared, his face etched with grim resolve, slipping her a final note. "Feds inbound, hold the line." It was a whisper of hope in the abyss, but Sarah knew hope alone didn't win wars. Action did. Breakfast passed in a haze of calculated observation. The cafeteria unusually subdued. Inmates avoiding her table but exchanging nods across gang lines, wolves mingling with Diablos, independents hovering like vultures, sensing carrion which confirmed the unprecedented coalition formed under the lure of Carver's blood money. A temporary truce in a place where loyalties shifted like sand. Martinez, her unlikely confidant from the laundry, sidled up briefly under the guise of clearing trays. "It's today. Ghost, yards, rigged 20+, armed to the teeth. Wolves are calling shots, but everyone's in for a cut. Stay low, maybe? Fake sick." Sarah shook her head subtly. "Running buys time, not victory. If it's the end, I meet it fighting." His eyes held respect mingled with sorrow as he walked away, a silent farewell in a world where goodbyes were rarely spoken. The march to the yard felt like a procession to the gallows, guards flanking her with unusual distance, their radios crackling with static that masked any potential alerts. Outside, the Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the expansive concrete enclosure ringed by chain-link topped with concertina wire. Basketball hoops standing sentinel-like, forgotten relics, and scattered exercise equipment that could double as barricades or weapons in the right hands. As the gate buzzed open, Sarah stepped into the arena, her senses hyper-alert, the faint metallic scent of hidden shanks, the subtle positioning of inmates forming a loose perimeter that funneled toward the center, and the absence of the usual chatter replaced by a predatory hush. Victor Razor Kane, the Aryan Wolves enforcer, with a face scarred from countless brawls and eyes cold as Arctic ice, stood at the epicenter, flanked by his lieutenants and cross-gang recruits, their jumpsuits concealing bulges of contraband pipes. Wrapped in tape, glass shards embedded in cloth handles, even a smuggled utility knife that gleamed ominously in the light. "End of the road, Fed rat," Kane drawled, his voice carrying across the yard like a judge's gavel. "Bounty's calling your head for our payday." Sarah positioned herself near a weight bench, using it as partial cover, her eyes scanning the 23. Assailants more than anticipated, their formation a crude phalanx with flanks ready to envelop. "Wrong play, Kane. Walk away now." He laughed, a sound devoid of mirth, signaling with a nod. The assault began not with a reckless charge, but a psychological feint, Diablos edging forward to probe, feigning lunges to gauge her reactions while the main group tightened the noose, forcing her to pivot constantly and expend energy on vigilance. Sarah conserved her movements, dodging a telegraphed swing from a pipe that clanged against the bench, countering with a swift kick to the attacker's shin that buckled him. But she didn't pursue, preserving stamina for the long game. Aware this was attrition warfare designed to wear her down before the killstroke. In Dallas, John Carver monitored from his secure home office, a bank of screens displaying hacked prison feeds courtesy of a bribed IT contractor. His fingers drumming impatiently as he watched the encirclement form. "Finish it clean," he muttered, into a burner phone connected to Kemper. The warden, holed up in his command center, sweated profusely, overriding alerts on his console to delay any response teams, his conscience warring with the debt he owed Carver. But cracks were forming. Torres had bypassed protocols, radioing an anonymous tip to federal channels hours earlier. Farther afield, in a convoy of black SUVs barreling down Texas highways, Colonel Robert Hayes gripped the dashboard, his team of marshals and Pentagon agents geared for breach, warrants burning in his pocket after a frantic night of assembling. Evidence, wire transfers traced to Carver's shells, tampered DOJ logs, and affidavits from whistleblowers painting a conspiracy that reached into the halls of power. ETA 15, the driver barked, but Hayes knew every minute was a lifetime. In combat. Back in the yard, the tempo escalated. Kane orchestrated waves, sending trios to harass while snipers of sorts lobbed debris from afar. Rocks and makeshift projectiles forcing Sarah to weave and duck, her breath coming in controlled bursts as she disarmed one assailant with a joint lock that snapped his wrist audibly, sending him howling retreat. "She's tiring," a Diablo jeered. But Sarah channeled her Delta PsyOps training, turning their taunts against them. "Bounties alike Carver's broke, using you as pawns." Doubt flickered in a few eyes, fracturing unity. An independent, hesitated might advance, earning a glare from Kane that promised retribution. Seizing the psychological edge, Sarah maneuvered toward a cluster of pull-up bars, using the structure for leverage vaulting to deliver an aerial kick that felled two clustered attackers, their improvised clubs clattering uselessly. Pain flared in her side from a glancing blow earlier, a bruised rib perhaps, but adrenaline masked it as she pressed the fluid. disrupting their formation with hit-and-run tactics reminiscent of guerrilla ops in urban sprawls. Kane roared orders. Rallying his forces for a concerted push, the circle contracting to 10 feet, weapons raised in a bristling hedge. Sarah's vial of cleaner sprayed into the eyes of the nearest, blinding him temporarily and creating a gap she exploited to roll clear, snatching a dropped shank for dual wielding. The fight devolved into chaos grunts, impacts, the metallic temps of blood as she parried a knife thrust, countering with a slash that opened a gash on an arm, not lethal, but demoralizing. In the convoy, Hayes's radio crackled with confirmation. Perimeter breach authorized go hot. Sirens wailed in the distance, but in the yard it was drowned by the melee. Sarah's world narrowed to survival, each block and strike a testament to her unyielding will. But numbers overwhelmed. A weighted sock caught her shoulder, numbing her arm momentarily. Allowing Kane to close in with his utility blade, his slash, aimed at her midsection. She twisted, the blade grazing fabric, and retaliated with a headbutt that split his lip, blood spraying as he staggered. "You'll pay for every scar," he spat, lunging again. Federal engines roared at the gates. Marshals demanding entry while Kemper stalled desperately via intercom, but Torres, from inside, overrode a lock remotely. His final act of defiance before potential fallout. The yard gate burst open amid warning shots cracking skyward, Hayes leading the charge in tactical vest, megaphone blaring, Federal agents stand down or be fired upon. Panic rippled through the assailants, half scattered. Bounties allure, paling against Federal rounds, but Kane's corps pressed on, driven by ego and fear of reprisal. Sarah, bloodied but unbroken, used the distraction disarming a Diablo with a chokehold, then pivoting to face Kane's final assault. Their clash a whirlwind of steel and fury where she disarmed him with a wrist twist honed in countless drills, slamming him to the ground just as marshals swarmed. "Sarah Mitchell, you're safe," Hayes barked, cuffing Kane amid shouts of rights recitation. The yard fell to ordered chaos, agents securing perps, medics tending Sarah's wounds a shallow. Cut bruises, but no breaks. In the armored evac, Hayes briefed, Carver's in custody FBI raid hit his compound simultaneously. Baxter's resigning, Bennett under review. Your testimony sealed it. Relief washed over Sarah like cool rain after drought. 6 months later, in the marbled halls of Capitol Hill, she stood before a congressional committee, her voice steady as she detailed the conspiracy. Not as a victim, but a victor. This wasn't isolated. It's a rot in the system where power buys silence. But resilience exposes it. Cameras captured her poise, inspiring headlines and reforms. At her nephew's birthday in suburban Texas, amid laughter and cake, she found peace, channeling settlement funds into the Mitchell Institute for Justice and Strength, a haven that trains the overlooked in defense and advocacy. As fireflies danced. In twilight, Hayes texted, "Mission accomplished." Sarah replied, "New ones await." Her journey, forged in fire, now illuminates paths for others, turning survival into a legacy.